The 10 billion fortress lost in 40 minutes. America turned Beijing's pride into ruins. 7:45 a.m., July 22, 2025, the South China Sea exploded into chaos as for YJ-21 hypersonic missiles moving at Mach 10 toward the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group. Overhead, the J-20 stealth fighters plunged in low, each armed with precision bombs. Within seconds, U.S. defenses roared, SM-6 interceptors launching at 3,500 miles per hour, shredding to incoming warheads, but not all. 2 missiles smashed into USS Mason and USS Lake Champlain, shaking decks, ripping steel, and leaving 7 American sailors wounded. In Beijing, state media erupted with triumph, hailing a historic victory. But the fight was far from over. The United States responded with immediate fury. 100 drones, 15 jets, 150,000 pounds of weapons. What began as a surprise strike would ignite a counteroffensive that turned China's boast into ashes and the South China Sea into America's battlefield. At 7:45 a.m. on July 22, 2025, the still waters of the South China Sea erupted into chaos. The USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group, America's newest and most powerful naval formation, was conducting routine patrols 220 nautical miles southeast of Hainan. Then came the shock. Chinese coastal batteries along Guangdong province suddenly ignited, launching for YJ-1 hypersonic anti-ship missiles, each capable of covering 1,500 kilometers in under 12 minutes, each weighing over 8 tons of destruction. But Beijing wasn't finished. Almost simultaneously, the J-20 stealth fighters roared off the runway, each armed with precision-guided bombs. Their mission was unmistakable: deliver a crippling blow to the Ford strike group before the Americans could react. On board the USS Ford, alarms blared. The Aegis combat system calculated firing solutions in seconds. 2 missiles were intercepted at Mach 5 speeds by SM-6 interceptors, exploding in brilliant fireballs high above the ocean. Yet the defense was not perfect. The remaining warheads tore through the sky, striking USS Mason DDG-87 and USS Lake Champlain CG-57. The impact shook steel decks, buckled plating, and wounded 7 sailors. Smoke and seawater mingled as damage control teams raced to seal compartments. Though both ships remained afloat and operational, the symbolism was chilling. For the first time in decades, Chinese missiles had drawn American blood at sea. In Beijing, state television declared a decisive opening victory, showing graphics of U.S. ships in flames. The message was clear. China believed the world's most powerful navy had been humbled, but in the calm steel corridors of the Ford, officers exchanged a different look. Not fear, not hesitation. Instead, a cold determination. The Chinese thought America would back down.
They had just made the gravest miscalculation of the century. If China dares to strike America's newest carrier group, how do you think the US will answer? By 8:15 am, July 22 ND 2025, only 30 minutes after impact, the Ford strike group had already restored order. On USS Mason and USS Lake Champlain, 7 sailors were injured, but not a single life was lost. Bulkheads sealed, fires extinguished, propulsion steady. Out of a formation totaling over 14 ships, 9,000 sailors, and 90 combat aircraft, the loss in combat effectiveness was less than 1%. For all of Beijing's bragging, the reality was simple. The US Navy remained almost untouched. Yet on Chinese state TV, the narrative was wildly different. They declared an end to US supremacy, airing computer graphics of carriers sinking in flames. Anchors shouted of a new Asian century, but the truth behind the Pacific horizon was far less favorable to them. The Gerald R. Ford, a 100,000-ton floating fortress, was fully operational with 4 nuclear reactors producing 700 megawatts of power, enough to light a city of 500,000 people. And her air wing, worth $7.8 billion alone, was being readied for launch. At the Combat Information Center, General Charles Q. Brown, JR gave the order in less than 5 minutes. No hesitation, no confusion. The United States would respond hard right at PLA Tank Base 3, where 70 of its best tanks were stored. The operation was codenamed Iron Thunder, a response designed not to match, but to overwhelm. The numbers told the story. 50 RQ-21 Blackjack UAVs to jam radar and blind enemy systems. 50 Switchblade 600 suicide drones, each with a 30-pound warhead enough to shred armor. 10 F-35C Lightning II seconds, each capable of carrying 18,000 pounds of ordnance. 5 F-18E Super Hornets, battle-tested, each with a strike radius of 1,250 miles. This was not a counter-punch. It was the gathering of a storm. A storm measured not in words, but in kilotons of firepower. Beijing thought America would back down. Instead, they had just awakened the arsenal of the free world. China celebrated too soon. The counter-strike you're about to see shook their pride to the core. Don't miss it. Support us with a like and subscribe and watch history unfold. At 9:00 a.m. the order was given. The Ford's flight deck erupted into motion. Not with jets just yet, but with drones, dozens of them. One after another, 50 RQ-21 Blackjack UAVs leapt skyward, their wings spanning barely 16 feet, but carrying electronic warfare payloads capable of frying circuits across hundreds of miles. Within 7 minutes, the swarm fanned out, saturating Chinese airspace with noise.
The radar screens inside the Chinese command bunkers lit up with dozens of red dots. False echoes, phantom squadrons, phantom fleets. To the operators, it looked as if more than 200 American aircraft were attacking them simultaneously. The reality, not a single man aircraft, had crossed the line. The HQ-9B long-range air defense missile system, the most advanced in the People's Liberation Army, suddenly went completely blind, enabled to distinguish sea jamming from enemy targets. But the opening act was only the distraction. At 9:12 a.m., the hammer fell. 50 Switchblade 600 kamikaze drones screamed in from multiple directions, each armed with a 30 pounds anti-armor warhead. To Chinese spotters on the ground, it looked like a cloud of steel hornets descending from the sky. In sheer numbers, the swarm was terrifying. 50 drones in a single wave represented more incoming targets than some nations' entire air forces could field in a week. Frantic gunners manning Type 1130 CIWS cannons spitting 10,000 rounds per minute managed to cut down 20 of the kamikazes. But even as shredded wings fell into the sea, 30 drones remained, weaving through the chaos. Seconds later, explosions tore across the coastline. Radar dishes shredded, 2 HQ-9 launchers gutted, fuel trucks blossoming into black fireballs. The damage was immediate and humiliating. A single coordinated strike had forced China to expend over 40 interceptor missiles worth nearly $100 million to down machines that cost America less than $70,000 apiece. The cost imbalance was staggering and the message unmistakable. Washington could bleed Beijing financially long before bleeding it militarily. By 9:20 a.m., smoke and static filled Chinese command screens. Radar operators shouted conflicting reports. Some saw fleets that didn't exist. Others missed real threats flying directly overhead. What had begun as confident celebration just an hour earlier was unraveling into chaos. And above that chaos, higher, faster, unseen, America's manned strike aircraft were already en route. The storm had only begun. China's unexpected response made them regret it all over again. At 9:27 a.m., as Chinese radar operators still struggled with screens filled with phantoms, the real blow arrived. The flight deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford, a 1,090-feet behemoth, roared with life. 1 OF-35C, Lightning to south, and 5 FA-18E Super Hornets catapulted into the humid South China Sea air at 5-second dawn intervals, their afterburners painting the horizon with fire. Each jet carried a strike package of 2,000 pounds JDAM precision bombs and Jibu-31 bunker busters, a payload exceeding 150,000 pounds of ordnance in a single wave. The target was unmistakable plot tank base number 3 outside Guanghe, home to over 120 Type 99 main battle tanks supported by HQ-9 Surface-Edo air batteries, fuel farms, and ammunition depots. A fortress on paper valued at nearly $12 billion in combined assets. But today it was about to become a graveyard. At 9:41 a.m., the first strike commenced. UAVs still buzzed overhead, ensuring radar blindness. The F-35s, invisible on Chinese scopes, descended silently before unleashing precision-guided bombs. Within seconds, 3 HQ-9 launchers worth $90 million each were destroyed. Fireballs erupted skyward as secondary explosions tore through the missile silos. Moments later, the Super Hornets dove in, releasing 15 Jibu-31s in rapid succession. The bombs smashed into tank hangars, igniting stored munitions. Shock waves rolled across the base with the force of several tons of TNT, flipping vehicles like toys. In under 5 minutes, dozens of Type 99 attacks were reduced to molten wreckage. But the destruction didn't end there. At 9:50 a.m., the jets shifted their aim to the lifeblood of any army, fuel, and ammunition. Dams tore into vast fuel reservoirs, each containing over 2 million gallons of diesel. The explosions were apocalyptic. Fireballs rose 300 feet into the sky, visible from downtown Guanghe. Ammunition bunkers detonated in chain reactions, scattering burning debris across a radius of half a mile. By 10:05 a.m., Tank Base No. 3 ceased to exist as a functioning military installation. $500 million worth of vehicles and infrastructure lay in ruins, and at least 300 soldiers were confirmed wounded or incapacitated. The message was deafening. China's opening strike had drawn blood, but America's answer had gutted an entire fortress in under 40 minutes. The balance of fear had shifted, and the counteroffensive had only just begun. The skies over Guanghe glowed with fire. Tank Base No. 3, once the pride of southern China, had become an inferno. Towers of flame rose more than 400 feet high, fueled by ruptured fuel depots holding over 2 million gallons of diesel. Ammunition stores, each packed with thousands of artillery shells, detonated in horrifying sequence, producing shock waves equivalent to 50 tons of TNT. The devastation was staggering. Satellite imagery relayed back to the Pentagon showed black scars spreading across a 5-square-mile radius, where neat rows of Type 99A tanks once gleamed. Only twisted steel skeletons remain. 70 tanks destroyed outright, another 30 crippled beyond repair, a loss of nearly $2.5 billion in armor alone. Casualty reports trickled in through intercepted communications. At least 300 Chinese soldiers wounded, many with severe burns or blast injuries. Dozens more were unaccounted for amid collapsed hangars and smoking debris fields. Medical facilities across Guanghe were overwhelmed within hours, straining under a flood of casualties that the PLA had never anticipated. And then came the humiliation. At 10:20 a.m., high above the ruins, surviving American UAVs broadcast live feed footage. Every flame, every shattered tank, every collapsed radar mast was recorded and transmitted straight to Washington. Within minutes, the images reached global news networks. The world now saw what Beijing desperately wanted to hide. The so-called invincible southern bastion had been annihilated in under 40 minutes. Inside the Central Military Commission in Beijing, silence replaced bravado. Billions of dollars in assets destroyed. One of the PLA's most important armored bases erased from the order of battle. A campaign meant to intimidate had backfired catastrophically. Meanwhile, on the USS Gerald R. Ford, the mood was one of grim satisfaction. Damage to the strike group was minor. 2 ships scarred, 7 sailors injured. In contrast, China had lost equipment and infrastructure worth over $10 billion in a single morning. By 10:30 a.m., Chinese state media abruptly shifted tone. The earlier boast of victory was gone, replaced with vague phrases about ongoing exercises. But the truth was undeniable. The United States had not only survived the opening blow, it had delivered a counterstrike so devastating that the balance of power in the South China Sea was no longer a debate. The battlefield was clear. America's Navy had spoken, and the cost to Beijing was written in fire and steel. The balance of the South China Sea had been redrawn and fired. What began at 7:45 a.m. as a Chinese surprise strike with for hypersonic YJ-1 missiles and to J-20 stealth fighters ended less than 3 hours later with catastrophic losses for Beijing. The U.S. Navy absorbed the initial blow. 2 escort ships damaged, 7 sailors lightly wounded, but the counterattack unleashed by the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group was overwhelming. In a single morning, America deployed 100 UAVs, 15 frontline jets, and more than 150,000 pounds of ordnance. The result was nothing short of annihilation. The destruction of Tank Base No. 3 near Guangzhou sent shock waves through China's military establishment. 70 tanks destroyed, 30 crippled, 3 HQ-9 missile batteries obliterated, 5 air defense sites reduced to rubble. Fuel reserves worth hundreds of millions of dollars went up in flames, while ammunition stores erupted in chain explosions that shook the ground for miles. Total damage: over $10 billion in hardware lost in less than 40 minutes. Casualty counts painted an even grimmer picture. At least 300 soldiers wounded, with dozens more missing in the smoldering wreckage. Hospitals across Guanghe overflowed, straining under the weight of unexpected war. And above it all, American UAVs broadcast crystal-clear footage of the devastation. Images replayed across the globe, stripping Beijing of its propaganda shield. The message was unmistakable. The world's most powerful navy had been bloodied, but not broken. China's attempt at intimidation had backfired, exposing vulnerabilities it never wanted the world to see. The South China Sea, once claimed as Beijing's backyard, now burned as a reminder that when the United States strikes back, it does so with unmatched precision, unstoppable firepower, and consequences counted in billions. This was not just a battle, it was a lesson. and the cost of that lesson may haunt Beijing for decades to come. If this story shook you, make sure to hit like, share it with others, and subscribe for more. Every click helps us uncover hidden battles and bring you the stories the world needs to hear. Stay with us because the truth deserves a voice.